I never thought I'd be the woman who'd serve revenge colder than Thanksgiving turkey, but life has a way of making you into someone you never imagined you could become. Before I tell you what happened that November night that changed everything, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share happened in suburban Connecticut, but betrayal speaks every language, and I have a feeling some of you might recognize pieces of your own story in mine. My name is Sarah, and for 12 years, I thought I was living the American dream. Marcus and I met at Yale Law School when we were both 25. He was a charming guy from Georgia who could make anyone laugh, and I was the serious girl from Michigan who'd worked 3 jobs to pay her way through undergrad. We fell in love over late-night study sessions and dreams of building something beautiful together. By 30, we were married in a ceremony that cost more than my parents' house. By 32, we'd bought a colonial in Westport with white picket fences and flower boxes that I tended every Sunday morning while Marcus read the Wall Street Journal on our wraparound porch. He'd made partner at Morrison & Associates, one of Connecticut's most prestigious corporate law firms. I'd taken a job at the local district attorney's office. Not as glamorous, not as lucrative, but meaningful work that let me sleep at night. For years, this felt like enough. More than enough. Marcus would come home with stories about corporate mergers and million-dollar deals, and I'd share updates about the domestic violence cases I was prosecuting and the families I was helping rebuild. We complemented each other. He was ambition and drive. I was heart and conscience. At least, that's what I told myself during those long evenings when he'd work late again, missing dinner, missing conversations, missing me. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared 3 years ago, around my 37th birthday. Marcus started traveling more frequently, client meetings in Manhattan, conferences in Chicago, networking events that seemed to multiply like rabbits. He'd bought a new wardrobe without consulting me, traded his reliable Honda for a BMW that screamed midlife crisis, and started hitting the gym with an intensity that bordered on obsession. When I asked about these changes, he had reasonable explanations for everything. The travel was necessary for landing bigger clients. The clothes were an investment in his professional image. The car was a reward for his hard work. The gym was just him taking better care of his health as he approached 40. Every explanation made sense individually, but together they formed a pattern I wasn't ready to acknowledge. The second crack came 18 months later, when I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for dinner at 11 Madison Park, a $400 meal for 2 that happened on a Tuesday night when he told me he was working late preparing for a deposition. When I confronted him, Marcus looked genuinely surprised, then slapped his forehead with that charming smile that had first made me fall in love with him. Oh God, Sarah, I totally forgot to mention it. Jeremy from the firm was in town with a potential client, some tech CEO from Silicon Valley. Last-minute dinner to seal the deal. You know how these things go. He pulled me close, kissed my forehead, and I let myself believe him because the alternative was too painful to consider. If you've ever been in a relationship where tiny inconsistencies start adding up, you know exactly how I felt during those months. There's a special kind of torture in noticing things but convincing yourself you're being paranoid. Marcus would shower immediately when he got home from work, which he'd never done before. His phone, which used to sit openly on our kitchen counter, migrated to his pocket and stayed there. He stopped initiating sex and seemed distracted even when I did. But the most devastating change was how he looked at me. For 12 years, Marcus had looked at me like I was the most interesting person in any room. Suddenly, his eyes would slide past me when I spoke, focusing on his phone or the television or anywhere but my face. I felt myself becoming invisible in my own marriage, and I hated how needy and desperate that made me feel. The third crack, the one that should have shattered everything, came 8 months ago when I decided to surprise him at his office with lunch from his favorite deli. I'd been promoted to senior prosecutor, and I wanted to share the news with the person who was supposed to be my biggest supporter. His secretary, Jennifer, looked uncomfortable when I walked in carrying the bag from Zio's Italian. "Oh, Mrs. Whitmore, Marcus didn't mention you were stopping by." "It's a surprise," I said, smiling as I headed toward his office door. "Wait, Sarah, he's in a meeting." But I was already pushing open the door, and the words died in my throat. Marcus wasn't in a meeting. He was standing behind his desk with his arms around a woman I'd never seen before. Tall, blonde, probably 10 years younger than me, wearing the kind of designer suit I could never afford on my government salary. They weren't kissing, but they were close enough that her perfume had replaced his usual cologne in the space between them. They broke apart when they saw me, and the woman smoothed her skirt with the kind of practiced efficiency that told me this wasn't their first close encounter. Marcus looked flustered, not guilty, just annoyed at the interruption. "Sarah, this is Amanda Chen, our new senior associate." "Amanda, my wife Sarah." Amanda extended a manicured hand and smiled with perfectly white teeth. "So nice to finally meet you, Sarah. Marcus talks about you all the time." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost believed it myself. Almost. But I could see the way Marcus relaxed when she took control of the situation, could see how his eyes followed her as she gathered her files and excused herself from the room. I could see everything, but I couldn't process it, couldn't make sense of what I was witnessing. "You should have called first," Marcus said after Amanda left, not bothering to ask why I was there or acknowledge the lunch I was still holding like an idiot. "I have back-to-back meetings all afternoon." I left without saying another word, threw the untouched sandwiches in a dumpster outside his building, and drove home in a daze. That night, I lay in bed listening to Marcus breathe beside me and wondered when I'd become the kind of woman who made excuses for the inexcusable. Amanda was beautiful, successful, young, everything I felt like I was no longer. Maybe they really were just colleagues. Maybe I was letting my insecurities transform innocent professional relationships into something sinister. Maybe I was losing my mind. But deep down, in the part of myself I'd been trying to silence for months, I knew the truth. My husband was having an affair, and I was too afraid of losing everything to admit it. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares, was that the affair was just the beginning. Marcus and Amanda weren't just betraying me. They were planning something so much worse than simple adultery. And I was about to find out exactly how far they were willing to go to get me out of the picture permanently. If you've ever felt like you're slowly disappearing in your own life, hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to get a whole lot more complicated. 3 weeks after the office incident, I did something I'd never imagined myself capable of. I hired a private investigator. Her name was Linda Vasquez, a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial cases, and she came highly recommended by one of my colleagues who'd gone through his own messy divorce the year before. Linda was nothing like the private investigators you see in movies. She was a stocky woman in her 50s with grey-streaked hair and the kind of direct gaze that made lying impossible. When I met her at a coffee shop in Stamford, 20 minutes from our house, I felt simultaneously relieved and disgusted with myself. "Let me be clear about something up front," Linda said, stirring her black coffee methodically. "In 23 years of doing this job, I've never had a client who was wrong about their suspicions. Never. Not once. If you're here, it's because you already know the truth. I'm just going to get you proof." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Some small part of me had been hoping she'd investigate and find nothing, that she'd give me permission to feel foolish for doubting my husband. Instead, Linda was telling me that my worst fears were about to be confirmed. "How long will it take?" I asked. "Depends on how careful they are being. But based on what you've told me, the changed behavior, the office encounter, the phone secrecy, I'd estimate 2 weeks, maybe 3. People having affairs think they're being subtle, but they leave digital footprints everywhere. Hotel receipts, cell phone records, credit card statements. The evidence is always there if you know where to look." I paid Linda her retainer fee with money from my personal savings account, the one Marcus didn't have access to, thank God, and tried to go about my normal life while she worked. Those 2 weeks were some of the strangest of my entire existence. I'd wake up next to Marcus every morning, make him coffee, kiss him goodbye, and pretend everything was normal while knowing that a stranger was following him around, documenting his betrayal. The waiting was excruciating. Every time my phone buzzed, I thought it might be Linda calling with updates. Every time Marcus came home late or seemed distracted, I analyzed his behavior like a forensic investigator. I became hyper-aware of every detail, the way he checked his phone during dinner, how he hummed in the shower, whether he seemed happier or more stressed than usual. What I discovered was that Marcus seemed lighter somehow, more energetic than he'd been in years. He laughed more easily, smiled more often, and had started bringing me small gifts. Flowers from the grocery store, my favorite chocolates, a bottle of wine just because. If I hadn't known what I suspected, I might have thought we were entering a new, better phase of our marriage. The irony was devastating. My husband was happier because he was cheating on me, and his guilt was manifesting as renewed attention to our relationship. I was getting the best version of Marcus in years, and it was all because he was in love with someone else. Linda called on a Friday afternoon while I was reviewing case files in my office. "Can you meet me tonight? I have what you need." We met at the same coffee shop, but this time Linda carried a manila envelope thick enough to contain my entire future. She slid it across the table without ceremony, and I stared at it like it might explode. "Before you open that," Linda said quietly, "I need you to know that this is worse than typical adultery. What your husband is doing isn't just about sex or even emotional connection. There's a financial component here that you need to understand." My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. The first photograph showed Marcus and Amanda entering the Ritz-Carlton in Manhattan, his hand on the small of her back. The second showed them kissing in the elevator. The third was taken through their hotel room window. They hadn't even bothered to close the curtains. But Linda was right. The photographs were just the beginning. Underneath were bank statements, credit card records, and hotel receipts dating back 18 months. Marcus hadn't just been having an affair, he'd been funding an elaborate second life. 5-star hotels, expensive restaurants, jewelry purchases, even a weekend trip to the Bahamas that he'd supposedly taken for a legal conference. "Here's where it gets interesting," Linda said, pointing to a series of financial documents. "Look at these transfers from your joint savings account. 20,000 here, 15,000 there, 30,000 2 months ago. All going into a separate account that has both his name and hers on it." I felt like I was drowning. Marcus had been systematically draining our savings. Money we'd set aside for the house renovations we'd been planning, money meant for the children we'd always said we'd have someday, money that represented 12 years of our life together. "There's more," Linda continued. "Amanda Chen isn't just sleeping with your husband. She's positioning herself to replace you in every way that matters. Look at this." She handed me a printed email exchange between Marcus and Amanda, apparently hacked from his law firm's server by Linda's tech consultant. The subject line read, "Timeline Discussion." The emails made me physically ill. They weren't love letters, they were strategic plans. Marcus and Amanda had been discussing how to handle the Sarah situation for months. They'd researched Connecticut's divorce laws, calculated how much Marcus would have to pay in alimony, and even consulted with a different law firm about the best way to protect his assets during the proceedings. But the worst part was reading how they talked about me. To them, I wasn't a person with feelings, I was an obstacle to overcome. Amanda wrote about how pathetic it was that I hadn't figured out what was happening. Marcus responded that I was too naive and trusting to ever catch on, and that my bleeding heart prosecutor salary made me financially dependent on him in ways that would work to their advantage. They were right about one thing: I had been naive and trusting. I'd spent 12 years building a life with someone who saw me as a liability to be managed rather than a partner to be cherished. "Sarah," Linda said gently, "there's one more thing you need to see." The final document in the envelope was a draft of divorce papers. Marcus had already been to a lawyer. He'd already decided to end our marriage, had already calculated exactly how little he could get away with giving me, had already planned to blindside me with legal documents I'd never see coming. The papers were dated for the week after Thanksgiving. "They're planning to serve you right after the holiday," Linda explained. "Probably figured you'd be emotional and distracted with family stuff, easier to manipulate into signing quickly." I sat in that coffee shop for 20 minutes, staring at evidence of my husband's betrayal, feeling like my entire world had been revealed as an elaborate lie. Everything I believed about Marcus, about our marriage, about my own life, was false. He didn't love me anymore. Maybe he never had. He saw me as weak, naive, financially dependent, easily disposed of. But here's the thing about underestimating someone: it can be a fatal mistake. Marcus and Amanda thought I was too trusting to catch on, too emotional to think strategically, too dependent to fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. As I drove home that night, passing the white picket fence and flower boxes I'd tended so carefully, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be the naive wife who got blindsided by divorce papers. I wasn't going to be the victim in their perfectly orchestrated plan. I was going to be something they'd never see coming. The hardest part about knowing the truth was pretending I didn't. For the next 2 weeks, I had to wake up every morning, kiss my husband goodbye, and act like the oblivious wife he believed me to be. But inside, I was transforming into someone new, someone calculating, strategic, and completely focused on justice. The first thing I did was secure my own legal representation. I couldn't use anyone from Marcus's circles, obviously, so I reached out to Patricia Morrison, no relation to Marcus's firm, a divorce attorney in New Haven who specialized in high-net-worth cases and had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless. Patricia was everything I needed: smart, aggressive, and completely unimpressed by Marcus's legal credentials. When I showed her Linda's evidence, she smiled with the kind of satisfaction that made me understand why she'd never lost a case. "Your husband made a critical error," she said, reviewing the financial documents. "He thinks he's been clever, moving money around, planning his strategy in secret. But Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, and hiding assets during a marriage is a very serious offense. We're not just going to get you half of everything, we're going to get you compensated for his deception." Patricia explained that Marcus's secret account with Amanda, the drained savings, the expensive affair-related purchases, all of it could be classified as dissipation of marital assets. In plain English, that meant I could potentially claim compensation for every dollar he'd spent on his mistress. "But here's what I recommend," Patricia continued. "Don't let them serve you first. You file for divorce before they have a chance to implement their plan. Catch them off guard. Make them respond to your timeline instead of controlling their own." That's when I started crafting something more elaborate than just beating them to the courthouse. I wanted justice, yes, but I also wanted them to understand exactly who they'd been underestimating. I wanted them to experience the same humiliation and betrayal they'd planned for me. Which is how I came up with the Thanksgiving plan. Marcus and I hosted Thanksgiving every year. His parents would drive up from Georgia, my parents would fly in from Michigan, and we'd invite our closest friends for what had always been our favorite tradition. This year's guest list included his brother Tyler and sister-in-law Jennifer, our best friends Kevin and Lisa, Marcus's law partner Jeremy, and several other couples we'd been socializing with for years. Marcus had been particularly excited about this year's dinner, talking about how he wanted to make it extra special and really memorable. Based on Linda's intelligence, I now understood why. He was planning to serve me with divorce papers right after our guests left, turning our favorite holiday into the day our marriage officially ended. But I had a different timeline in mind. My plan required precise coordination and nerves of steel. First, I needed to document everything leading up to the confrontation. Linda agreed to position herself outside our house during the party with long-range photography equipment, ready to capture whatever unfolded. Patricia would be on standby with legal documents of my own. Second, I needed to control the narrative. Marcus and Amanda thought they were the only ones with information, but I'd been gathering evidence for weeks. Phone records, hotel receipts, email exchanges, financial statements. I had everything organized in a presentation that would leave no room for denial or manipulation. Third, I needed witnesses. Our Thanksgiving guests weren't just friends and family. They were Marcus's professional network, people whose opinions mattered to his career and reputation. If he wanted to humiliate me publicly, I'd give him a masterclass in how public humiliation actually worked. The week before Thanksgiving, I made my final preparations. I had copies of every piece of evidence stored in multiple locations. I'd arranged for Patricia to file divorce papers first thing Monday morning, beating Marcus's planned timeline by several days. I'd even prepared a detailed financial accounting of every dollar he'd stolen from our joint accounts to fund his affair. But the most important preparation was emotional. I spent hours in front of my bathroom mirror, practicing staying calm under pressure. I rehearsed responses to various scenarios, planned how I'd maintain my dignity no matter how ugly things got. I knew I'd only get one chance to do this right, and I couldn't afford to fall apart when the moment came. Marcus, meanwhile, was acting like a man without a care in the world. He helped me plan the menu, clean the house, and prepare for our guests with more enthusiasm than he'd shown for anything in years. He kept talking about how this was going to be a Thanksgiving to remember and how he was grateful for new beginnings. The dramatic irony was almost too much to bear. My husband was practically giddy with anticipation for his own surprise, completely oblivious to mine. He thought he held all the cards, controlled all the information, had planned for every contingency. He had no idea that his naive, trusting wife had become someone else entirely. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Amanda called the house. I answered, and she seemed surprised to hear my voice. "Oh, hi Sarah. I was looking for Marcus. Is he around?" "He's in the shower," I said pleasantly. "Can I take a message?" "Just tell him Amanda called about Thursday's timeline. He'll know what I mean." Thursday's timeline. The divorce papers. They were so confident in their plan that they weren't even being careful about their communications anymore. "Of course," I said. "I'll make sure he gets the message." That night, Marcus seemed nervous for the first time in weeks. He kept checking his phone, pacing around the house, asking me random questions about our guest list and dinner timeline. I realized he was probably having second thoughts about publicly humiliating me in front of our friends and family, maybe wondering if he should serve the papers privately instead. But it was too late for him to change course now. Everything was in motion. On Wednesday evening, as I was doing final preparations for the next day's dinner, Marcus came up behind me in the kitchen and wrapped his arms around my waist. For just a moment, it felt like old times, like we were the couple who'd fallen in love over late-night study sessions and dreams of building something beautiful together. "I love you, Sarah," he said quietly. "I want you to remember that, no matter what happens." It was such a strange thing to say that I almost broke character. Almost turned around and confronted him right there, demanded to know why he was destroying our marriage, asked him if any of the past 12 years had meant anything to him at all. Instead, I leaned back against his chest and said, "I love you too, Marcus. Tomorrow is going to be very memorable." He had no idea how memorable it was about to become. Thanksgiving morning dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect November days that makes you believe in new beginnings. I woke up before sunrise, not because I needed to start cooking, but because I couldn't sleep. Today was the day that would define the rest of my life, and I felt like a soldier preparing for the most important battle I'd ever fight. Marcus was still sleeping, looking peaceful and innocent in the early morning light. For just a moment, I let myself remember what it felt like to love this man unconditionally, to trust him with my entire heart, to believe that we'd grow old together in this house we'd built into a home. Then I remembered Amanda's manicured hand in his, remembered the divorce papers he'd already prepared, remembered every cruel thing they'd said about me in those emails. The peaceful moment passed, and I got to work. By the time Marcus woke up, I had the turkey in the oven, pie crusts rolled out, and vegetables prepped for side dishes. I was the picture of domestic perfection, exactly the role I'd been playing for 12 years, exactly the woman he thought he was discarding today. "You're up early," he said, kissing my cheek with what I now recognized as performance affection. "Everything smells amazing." "I want today to be perfect," I replied, meaning it in ways he couldn't possibly understand. Our guests would start arriving at 2 o'clock. Marcus's parents, James and Patricia Whitmore, were driving up from Savannah and would be the first to arrive. They always insisted on coming early to help with preparations. My parents, David and Carol Mitchell, were flying in from Detroit and would arrive around 3. The other guests, Tyler and Jennifer, Kevin and Lisa, Jeremy and his wife Sandra, and 2 other couples from Marcus's professional circle, were invited for 4 o'clock cocktails, with dinner planned for 6. What Marcus didn't know was that Amanda would be joining us. Not because he'd invited her, he was planning to keep his professional and personal deceptions separate for as long as possible, but because I'd invited her myself. 3 days earlier, I'd called Amanda's office, introducing myself as Sarah Whitmore and explaining that Marcus had mentioned what a valuable addition she was to the firm. Would she like to join us for Thanksgiving dinner? Marcus worked so hard, and I thought it would be nice for him to have some of his favorite colleagues there to help him relax and celebrate. Amanda had seemed surprised but pleased. That's so thoughtful of you, Sarah. Are you sure it won't be too much trouble? No trouble at all, I'd assured her. Marcus has told me so much about you. I'm looking forward to finally getting to know the woman who's been making such an impression at the firm. I'd asked her to arrive around 5:30, explaining that we'd be serving cocktails and appetizers before dinner. What I didn't mention was that 5:30 would be the perfect time for her to walk into the middle of whatever Marcus had planned. The morning passed in a blur of cooking, cleaning, and final preparations. Marcus seemed increasingly agitated as the day progressed, checking his phone constantly and making several whispered phone calls from his home office. I pretended not to notice, focusing on playing the perfect hostess role with just a hint of pre-party nervousness. His parents arrived right on schedule, and I greeted them with genuine warmth. James and Patricia Whitmore were good people who'd raised their son to believe in honor, commitment, and treating others with respect. They had no idea that their successful lawyer son was about to publicly humiliate his wife of 12 years. Sarah, darling, you look wonderful, Patricia said, embracing me tightly. And this house smells like heaven. Marcus is so lucky to have you. If she only knew how unlucky he was about to become. My parents arrived an hour later, and the house began filling with the comfortable chaos of family gathering together. Mom immediately headed to the kitchen to help with final preparations, while Dad settled into his traditional spot on the living room couch with James, where they debate politics and football until dinner was served. I moved through these familiar rhythms like an actress who'd been rehearsing the same play for years. I knew exactly how to manage the personalities, coordinate the timing, keep conversations flowing smoothly. I'd perfected the art of being the invisible orchestrator who made everything look effortless. But today, I was orchestrating something very different. At 4 o'clock, our other guests began arriving. Tyler and Jennifer brought wine and stories about their twin toddlers. Kevin and Lisa came with their famous sweet potato casserole and updates about their recent trip to Italy. Jeremy and Sandra arrived with flowers and compliments about how beautiful our house looked. Marcus was playing his part perfectly too, greeting everyone with enthusiasm and charm, making sure drinks were refilled and conversations were lively. To an outside observer, we looked like the perfect couple hosting the perfect Thanksgiving celebration. Around 5 o'clock, Marcus started checking his phone more frequently. He kept glancing toward the front door and seemed to be waiting for something. I realized he was probably expecting a call or text from Amanda, coordinating whatever surprise he had planned for later. At 5:15, Marcus excused himself to take a phone call. He stepped out onto our back patio, and through the kitchen window, I could see him pacing and gesturing as he spoke. When he came back inside, he looked tense and slightly flustered. "Everything okay, honey?" I asked, playing the concerned wife perfectly. "Just work stuff," he said. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." 5:20. 5:25. Marcus was checking his watch now, clearly operating on some kind of timeline that was making him increasingly nervous. Our guests were all here, dinner was nearly ready, and everyone was having a wonderful time. At exactly 5:30, the doorbell rang. Marcus looked confused. We weren't expecting anyone else. But I smiled brightly and headed toward the front door, calling over my shoulder, "I'll get it. I think we have one more guest joining us." I could feel Marcus following me, could sense his confusion turning into something sharper as I reached for the door handle. Our other guests were still chatting in the living room and kitchen, completely unaware that the evening was about to take a dramatic turn. I opened the door to find Amanda Chen standing on our front porch, holding a bottle of wine and looking absolutely stunning in a burgundy dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. She was beautiful, polished, confident, everything I'd once feared I was no longer. "Amanda," I said warmly, as if seeing my husband's mistress was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm so glad you could make it. Please, come in." Behind me, I heard Marcus make a sound that was somewhere between a cough and a gasp. Amanda's eyes went wide as she saw him, clearly realizing that this wasn't the plan they'd discussed. "Sarah invited Amanda from your firm," I announced to the room, leading her into our living room where our guests were gathering. Marcus has told me so much about what an asset she's been to the company. I thought it would be lovely to include her in our family celebration. The next few minutes were fascinating to watch. Marcus was trying to appear normal while clearly panicking about having his wife and mistress in the same room with his parents, in-laws, and closest friends. Amanda was attempting to make polite conversation while shooting confused glances at Marcus, clearly wondering what the hell was happening. And me. I was playing the gracious hostess, introducing Amanda to everyone, making sure she had a drink, asking her thoughtful questions about her work and her background. I was everything a wife should be: welcoming, generous, completely secure in her marriage. "Amanda, you simply must try Sarah's famous stuffing," Patricia Whitmore was saying. "It's been Marcus's favorite since their first Thanksgiving together." "I'd love to," Amanda replied, though she looked like she wanted to disappear. Marcus kept trying to catch my eye, probably wondering if I'd somehow discovered their relationship and was playing some kind of game. But I gave him nothing but warm smiles and loving glances, the picture of a devoted wife who simply wanted to include her husband's hard-working colleague in their family tradition. At 6 o'clock, I announced that dinner was ready. Everyone gathered around our dining room table, the one Marcus and I had bought for our first anniversary, the one where we'd shared 12 years of holidays and celebrations and ordinary Tuesday night dinners. Marcus sat at the head of the table, as always. I took my traditional spot at the opposite end. And Amanda, by sheer coincidence of timing and available seating, ended up sitting right next to my husband. As we passed dishes and filled plates, Marcus seemed to be sweating despite the November chill. He kept glancing between Amanda and me, clearly trying to figure out what kind of trap he'd walked into. Amanda was doing her best to act normal, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. Meanwhile, our guests were having a wonderful time, completely oblivious to the undercurrents of drama swirling around them. Jeremy was telling stories about his latest cases, Kevin was debating football scores with my dad, and the women were sharing updates about their children and careers. It was during dessert, my homemade apple pie served with vanilla ice cream, that Marcus finally made his move. He stood up, tapping his wine glass with his fork to get everyone's attention. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," he said, his voice carrying that courtroom authority that had made him so successful. "I have something important I'd like to share." This was it. The moment he'd been planning for weeks. The public humiliation he thought would catch me completely off guard. But as Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out an envelope I recognized from Linda's surveillance photos, I felt nothing but calm certainty. He thought he was about to destroy me. He had no idea I was about to destroy him first. Marcus stood at the head of our dining room table, envelope in hand, surrounded by the people who mattered most to both of us. The room fell quiet, everyone turning toward him with the kind of expectant attention you give someone about to make an important announcement. I watched him take a deep breath, watched him look around the table at faces of family and friends who trusted him, respected him, loved him. His eyes lingered on his parents, who were beaming with pride at their successful son. Then he looked at me, and for just a moment, I saw something that might have been regret flicker across his features. But it was too late for regrets now. 12 years ago, Marcus began, his voice steady and confident, I married the most wonderful woman I'd ever met. Sarah has been my partner, my supporter, my anchor through everything we've built together. I felt my mother reach over and squeeze my hand, felt the warmth and love from our guests as they smiled at what they thought was going to be a heartfelt tribute to our marriage. Marcus paused, his eyes finding Amanda's face. She was sitting perfectly still, wine glass frozen halfway to her lips, clearly understanding that whatever was about to happen hadn't been part of their plan. But sometimes, Marcus continued, life takes you in directions you never expected. Sometimes you discover that what you thought was love was really just comfort, familiarity. And sometimes you meet someone who shows you what real passion actually feels like. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I watched my father's face change from pleasant attention to confusion to growing alarm. Jennifer put down her fork with a soft clink that sounded unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Marcus pulled the papers from the envelope, holding them up for everyone to see. These are divorce papers. I've had them prepared by Morrison and Associates, a different firm than my own, to avoid any conflicts of interest. Sarah, I'm sorry to do this here, in front of everyone, but I wanted our family and friends to understand that this isn't about anger or hatred. It's about honesty. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the antique clock on our mantel ticking, could hear someone's sharp intake of breath, could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. But I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I didn't react at all. I just sat there, looking at my husband with what I hoped appeared to be shocked silence. Marcus continued, gaining confidence from what he interpreted as my stunned submission. I know this is difficult, and I know the timing seems cruel. But Amanda and I have fallen in love, and we can't continue living a lie. That's when he did the most unforgivable thing of all. Marcus walked over to where Amanda was sitting, reached down, and pulled her to her feet. She looked mortified, clearly wishing she could disappear, but he wrapped his arm around her waist and held her close. Amanda Chen. Everyone. She's brilliant, successful, and she's shown me what my life could be like with someone who truly understands my ambitions and my dreams. Jeremy, Marcus's law partner, looked absolutely stricken. Marcus, what the hell are you doing? But Marcus wasn't finished. He raised his wine glass high, looking around the table at our shocked guests, and said the words that sealed his fate. So I'd like you all to raise your glasses and toast to new beginnings, to honesty, and to Amanda, my future wife. The room erupted. Tyler half stood from his chair, his face flushed with anger. Are you out of your goddamn mind? He shouted at his brother. My mother made a sound like she'd been physically struck. My father's face went from confusion to pure rage in about 2 seconds flat. Jeremy was staring at Amanda like he couldn't believe what he was seeing, and Sandra had her hand over her mouth in horror. But the most devastating reaction came from Marcus's own parents. James Whitmore, the man who taught his son about honor and commitment, looked at Marcus like he was staring at a stranger. Patricia's face crumpled, and she reached across the table toward me with tears streaming down her cheeks. Sarah, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. We had no idea. Marcus seemed surprised by the hostility of the reactions. I think he genuinely expected people to understand, maybe even support his decision to pursue his happiness. Instead, he was facing a room full of people who looked at him like he'd just committed murder. Look, I know this is hard, Marcus said, still holding Amanda against his side like a trophy. But sometimes you have to make difficult choices to live authentically. That's when Kevin stood up, his chair scraping loudly against our hardwood floor. Get out, he said quietly. Kevin, please, let me explain. Get the fuck out of this house, Kevin repeated, louder this time. Both of you. Right now. Amanda looked like she wanted to crawl under the table and die. Marcus, maybe we should. No, Marcus said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. This is my house too. Sarah, you need to sign these papers. He walked over to my end of the table and set the divorce documents down in front of me, along with a pen. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how I'd react to this public humiliation, this calculated cruelty designed to make me feel small and powerless. I looked down at the papers, the same papers Linda had shown me weeks ago, the same documents I'd already seen and analyzed and prepared counter-strategies for. I looked at my husband's confident face, at Amanda's mortified expression, at our friends and family watching this nightmare unfold. And then I smiled. It wasn't a sad smile or a bitter smile. It was the kind of smile you get when you're about to show someone that they've made a terrible mistake. Of course, Marcus, I said calmly, picking up the pen. I'll sign your papers. The relief that crossed his face was almost comical. He'd been so afraid I'd make a scene, cause drama, make things difficult for him. Instead, his docile little wife was going to sign quietly and let him have his new life with minimal fuss. I signed my name with a flourish, then stood up and handed the papers back to him. There you go. All signed. Marcus actually looked pleased. Thank you, Sarah. I know this is hard, but I think you'll find that this is better for both of us in the long run. Oh, I absolutely agree, I said, still smiling. This is definitely better for me. That's when I reached into my own purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope, the same kind Linda had given me weeks ago, but much thicker. Since we're making announcements tonight, I have a few of my own. The confidence started to drain from Marcus's face. Sarah, what are you doing? Well, since you wanted to do this publicly, in front of our family and friends, I thought they should know the whole story. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first photograph. Marcus and Amanda entering the Ritz-Carlton. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Amanda Chen, the woman my husband has been having an affair with for the past 18 months. I passed the photo around the table, watching faces change as people realized what they were looking at. This affair has cost us over $80,000 in hotel bills, restaurant charges, jewelry purchases, and vacation expenses, all paid for with money from our joint savings account. Marcus had gone completely pale. Sarah, stop. Oh, I'm just getting started, I said cheerfully. Amanda, I'm sure everyone would love to hear about those emails you and Marcus exchanged, the ones where you called me pathetic and discussed the best strategies for taking my husband's money while giving me as little as possible in the divorce. Amanda looked like she was going to be sick. I never said. Actually, you did. I pulled out printed copies of their email exchanges. I have everything. Every hotel receipt, every credit card statement, every text message, every plan you two made behind my back. The room was dead silent now, everyone staring at Marcus and Amanda with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. Jeremy looked particularly stricken, not just because of the personal betrayal, but because he was clearly calculating the professional implications of having an affair with a subordinate. But I wasn't done. The really interesting part, I continued, is that Marcus has been planning this divorce for months. He consulted with lawyers, researched asset protection strategies, even tried to hide money in joint accounts with his mistress. The papers he just asked me to sign? They would have left me with almost nothing while he kept the house, most of our savings, and his full pension. Marcus was gripping the back of his chair now, his knuckles white. Sarah, please. Please what? Please keep quiet while you humiliate me in front of our families? Please sign away my rights to 12 years of marriage while you celebrate with your mistress. I laughed, and it sounded genuinely amused. I don't think so. I reached into the envelope one more time and pulled out my final surprise, a thick stack of legal documents with Patricia Morrison's letterhead. As it happens, I filed for divorce 3 days ago. My papers cite adultery, dissipation of marital assets, and fraud. Connecticut law is very clear about what happens to spouses who hide money and lie during divorce proceedings. I smiled at Marcus's increasingly panicked expression. I'm going to get compensation for every dollar you spent on your affair, plus punitive damages, plus half of everything else. Your pension, your partnership stake in the firm, this house, all of it. The silence that followed was broken by Tyler's slow clap. Holy shit, Sarah. That's incredible. Marcus was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. You knew? This whole time, you knew? I've known for weeks, I said. I hired a private investigator, gathered evidence, consulted with the best divorce attorney in Connecticut, and planned for every contingency. While you and Amanda were plotting to betray and humiliate me, I was building a case that's going to destroy both of you. Jeremy stood up abruptly. Amanda, you're fired. Effective immediately. Pack your office tomorrow morning and don't come back. Jeremy, please, Amanda started. No, Jeremy said coldly. You had an affair with a married partner and helped him defraud his wife. You're done. And Marcus. He looked at his longtime partner with contempt. We'll be discussing your future at the firm very seriously. Marcus seemed to realize that everything was falling apart. This doesn't change anything, he said desperately. Sarah, we can work this out privately. We don't need to involve lawyers. Actually, we do. I pulled out my phone and showed him Patricia Morrison's number. She's expecting my call. The fun part is that since you served me papers first, you triggered the fraud investigation I've been building. Every hidden asset, every secret account, every dollar you stole, it's all evidence now. That's when Marcus did something I'd never seen him do in 12 years of marriage. He completely lost control. His face went red, his hands shook, and he started shouting. You bitch! You manipulative, vindictive bitch! I gave you everything. I gave you 12 years of my life, and this is how you repay me. The room exploded again, but this time it was our friends and family rising to defend me. Tyler moved toward his brother like he was planning to hit him. My father stood up with murder in his eyes. Even gentle Patricia Whitmore was on her feet, pointing an accusing finger at her own son. How dare you, she said, her voice shaking with rage. How dare you stand in this house that Sarah has made into a home for you, surrounded by people who love her, and call her names because she was smarter than you thought. But I held up my hand, asking for quiet. When the room settled down, I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, maybe for the last time. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. You did give me 12 years of your life. And I gave you 12 years of mine. I gave you my trust, my love, my loyalty, and my faith. I believed in you, supported your dreams, made your happiness my priority. And you threw it all away for an affair. I walked over to where he was standing and looked him directly in the eyes. But here's what you never understood about me, Marcus. I'm not the naive, trusting woman you married. I'm a prosecutor. I've spent years learning how to investigate, how to build cases, how to destroy people who think they're smarter than everyone else. Marcus was staring at me like I was a stranger, which I suppose I was. The woman he'd married would never have done what I'd just done. But betrayal changes people, and not always in the ways betrayers expect. So thank you, I continued, for underestimating me. Thank you for assuming I'd be too weak, too dependent, too heartbroken to fight back. Because that assumption is going to cost you everything you care about. I turned to address our guests, who were still sitting in stunned silence around our dining room table. I want to apologize to all of you for having to witness this. You came here for a family celebration, and instead you got front row seats to the end of my marriage. But I'm not sorry it happened this way, because now you all know the truth about who Marcus Whitmore really is. Then I did something that felt like the most natural thing in the world. I walked over to Amanda, who had been standing frozen beside Marcus throughout this entire confrontation, and I smiled at her with genuine warmth. Amanda, congratulations. You're getting exactly the man you deserve. Someone who'll lie to your face, steal from his own wife, and humiliate you in public when it suits his purposes. I hope you'll be very happy together. The look of horror on her face told me everything I needed to know about how happy she expected to be. And then I did the thing that would become legend in our social circle for years to come. I walked back to my place at the table, picked up my wine glass, and raised it high. Now then, I said brightly, I'd like to propose a toast of my own. To new beginnings, to getting exactly what we deserve, and to the importance of reading the fine print before you sign anything. Our guests, every single one of them, raised their glasses and drank to my toast while Marcus and Amanda stood there like the pariahs they'd just become. That was the moment Marcus realized he hadn't just lost a wife. He'd lost his family, his friends, his reputation, and quite possibly his career. All because he'd underestimated the woman who'd loved him for 12 years. All because he thought revenge was a dish best served hot, when everyone knows it tastes much better cold. The 24 hours following that Thanksgiving dinner were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I felt simultaneously exhausted and energized, devastated and triumphant, heartbroken and vindicated. But mostly, I felt free for the first time in months. Marcus and Amanda left our house that night in complete disgrace, followed by the disgusted stares of everyone who'd witnessed their humiliation. They didn't go together. Amanda practically ran to her car the moment she could escape, while Marcus lingered on our front porch, apparently still hoping he could somehow salvage the situation. Sarah, please, he said through the screen door as I locked up. Can we talk privately? Just for 5 minutes. We'll be talking plenty through our lawyers, I replied calmly. You should call yours first thing Monday morning. You're going to need all the help you can get. Our guests stayed for another hour after Marcus and Amanda left, not because anyone wanted to continue celebrating, but because they were too stunned to know what else to do. My parents were incredible. Mom helped me clear dishes and put away leftovers while Dad sat with Marcus's parents, who were absolutely devastated by their son's behavior. James Whitmore pulled me aside before they left. Sarah, I need you to know that Patricia and I had no idea about any of this. We're horrified by what Marcus has done, and we want you to know that you'll always be family to us, no matter what happens with the divorce. His words meant more to me than I could express. Losing Marcus was painful enough. Losing the people who'd been my second parents for 12 years would have been unbearable. Tyler was even more direct. Whatever you need, he said, hugging me tightly. Money for lawyers, a place to stay, someone to help you move, anything. Marcus is my brother, but what he did tonight is unforgivable. By the time everyone left, it was nearly midnight. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been our favorite holiday, and tried to process everything that had happened. The house felt different somehow, not just empty, but fundamentally changed, like a stage set after the play has ended. I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine Marcus had opened for his toast and sat down at our kitchen island, the same place where we'd shared thousands of conversations over the years. For the first time since I discovered his affair, I let myself really feel the loss of what we'd had together. Because underneath all the betrayal and manipulation and cruelty, there had been real love once. We'd been genuinely happy for years before everything went wrong. I'd lost not just my husband, but my best friend, my partner, my future as I'd always imagined it would be. I cried for about 20 minutes, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place I'd been trying to avoid for months. I cried for the naive woman I'd been, for the marriage I'd thought we had, for the children we'd never have together, for the dreams that were never going to come true. But when the tears stopped, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The uncertainty was over. The pretending was finished. The gaslighting, the lies, the constant feeling like I was losing my mind, all of it was in the past now. Whatever happened next, at least it would be real. Friday morning brought the first wave of consequences. Patricia Morrison called at 8 a.m. with updates from her end. Marcus's lawyer called me at 6:30 this morning, she said, sounding grimly pleased. Apparently your husband is claiming that you entrapped him somehow, that last night was some kind of elaborate setup designed to make him look bad. It was an elaborate setup, I said. That was the point. Patricia laughed. I told his lawyer the same thing. The beautiful part is that nothing you did was illegal or unethical. You gathered evidence, prepared your case, and responded strategically to his attempt to blindside you. If that makes him look bad, it's because what he was doing was actually bad. She explained that Marcus's legal team was already trying to claim that our divorce should be handled under no-fault provisions, arguing that both parties had simply grown apart and deserved equal treatment. But the evidence I'd gathered made that impossible. Connecticut courts don't look kindly on spouses who commit adultery and hide assets, Patricia explained. Your husband's affair, combined with his systematic theft from your joint accounts, constitutes both grounds for fault-based divorce and financial misconduct. He's not going to be able to negotiate his way out of this. The second wave of consequences came through Jeremy Morrison's phone call around 10 a.m. Marcus's law partner sounded exhausted and furious. Sarah, I want to apologize on behalf of the entire firm for what happened last night. We had no idea about Marcus's relationship with Amanda, and we're treating this as a serious breach of professional conduct. He explained that Amanda had already been terminated, effective immediately. Her affair with a married partner, combined with her participation in hiding assets during divorce proceedings, violated multiple ethical standards. She'd be lucky if she could practice law anywhere in Connecticut after this. And Marcus? I asked. Jeremy sighed heavily. That's more complicated. He's a named partner in the firm, which gives him certain protections. But his behavior has created liability issues for all of us. We're meeting with the other partners this weekend to discuss his future. I felt a stab of satisfaction at that news. Marcus had always been so proud of his professional reputation, so confident that his success made him untouchable. He was about to learn that actions have consequences, even for successful lawyers. The third wave came through social media and our social network. By Friday afternoon, the story of Marcus's Thanksgiving disaster had spread through our entire social circle. Apparently, Kevin had shared the basic details with several mutual friends, and the story had taken on a life of its own. My phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts from people who'd heard various versions of what had happened. Some were offering support, others were asking for details, and a few were clearly just fishing for gossip. I turned my phone off around noon and decided to let the speculation run its course. But Linda, my private investigator, called with more interesting information. "I've been monitoring Marcus and Amanda's communications since yesterday," she said. "You're not going to believe what's happening between them." According to Linda's sources, Marcus and Amanda were already turning on each other. Amanda was furious that Marcus had blindsided her with the public announcement. Apparently, they'd agreed to handle the divorce quietly and privately, never intending for their relationship to become public knowledge at a family dinner. She's claiming that Marcus pressured her into the affair, that she never wanted it to become serious, and that she had no idea he was planning to serve you papers at Thanksgiving, Linda reported. She's trying to distance herself from him as much as possible. Marcus, meanwhile, was blaming Amanda for everything. He was telling anyone who'd listened that she'd seduced him, manipulated him into leaving his marriage, and convinced him that I'd never fight back against the divorce. "They're eating each other alive," Linda said with obvious satisfaction. "Within a week, they'll hate each other more than they ever loved each other." That prediction turned out to be remarkably accurate. Saturday morning brought the weekend edition of our local newspaper, which included a small item in the legal notices section. Morrison and Associates announces the departure of Associate Amanda Chen, effective immediately. It was a tiny mention, barely noticeable, but anyone in the local legal community would understand exactly what it meant. By Saturday afternoon, I'd received flowers from 6 different people, casseroles from 3 neighbors, and calls from 2 headhunters who'd heard I might be looking for a new job. Apparently, my reputation as someone who could outmaneuver a room full of lawyers was spreading, and several firms were interested in my prosecutorial skills. Sunday brought the most unexpected consequence of all. Marcus showed up at our house. I was in the garden, cutting back the last of my fall flowers, when I heard his car in the driveway. Part of me wanted to go inside and lock the doors, but I realized I wasn't afraid of him anymore. Whatever power he'd held over me was gone, broken the moment he'd underestimated me so completely. He looked terrible. His hair was unwashed, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had the kind of hollow-eyed exhaustion that comes from not sleeping for days. When he got out of his car, he moved like an old man, defeated and broken. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I need to talk to you." "Talk," I said, not stopping my garden work. "I made a terrible mistake. The biggest mistake of my life." His voice was hoarse, like he'd been shouting or crying or both. "I was an idiot, and I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry." I looked up at him then, really looked. This was the man I'd loved for 12 years, the man who'd shared my dreams and my bed and my life. Now he looked like a stranger, hollow, desperate, completely lost. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want to come home," he said simply. "I want to fix this. I want us to try again." For just a moment, I felt a flicker of the old compassion, the old desire to make everything okay, to smooth over the hurt and pretend it had never happened. That was who I'd been for 12 years, the woman who made everything work, who forgave and forgot and kept the peace. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "No," I said simply. "Sarah, please. I know I fucked up, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling, take a vacation, start fresh. I'll do anything." "No," I repeated, standing up and brushing dirt from my knees. "You made your choice, Marcus. You chose Amanda, you chose lies, you chose to humiliate me in front of our families. Now you get to live with those choices." "But I don't love her," he said desperately. "I love you. I've always loved you. The thing with Amanda was just, I don't know what it was. Stupidity. Midlife crisis. It didn't mean anything." "It meant everything," I said quietly. "It meant that when things got difficult, You looked for someone else to blame. It meant that instead of talking to me about your unhappiness, you decided to betray me. It meant that you saw me as disposable. Marcus was crying now, actual tears streaming down his face. I never thought of you as disposable. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it all away for nothing. You're right, I said. You did throw it all away. And now you get to live with that choice for the rest of your life. I walked past him toward the house, then paused at the back door. Marcus, don't come here again. From now on, all communication goes through our lawyers. As I went inside, I heard him calling my name, heard him begging me to reconsider, heard him sobbing in our driveway like a broken man. And I felt nothing but pity for him. He'd gotten exactly what he deserved. Monday morning arrived with the sharp clarity that comes after a storm. I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, for what I knew might be the last time, and felt ready for whatever came next. The hardest part, the uncertainty, the deception, the feeling like I was losing my mind, was over. Now it was just a matter of fighting for what I deserved. Patricia Morrison had asked me to be at her office by 9 a.m. to begin the formal legal proceedings. As I drove through downtown New Haven, I caught myself automatically taking the route that would pass Marcus's firm, then deliberately turned a different direction. I was done organizing my life around his convenience. Patricia's office was everything I'd hoped for, professional, intimidating, and filled with the kind of legal awards and recognition that suggested she ate opposing counsel for breakfast. When I arrived, she had my case files spread across a conference table that looked like it belonged in a corporate boardroom. Before we begin, Patricia said, I want you to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Your husband's legal team filed a motion this morning asking for an emergency hearing to contest the validity of your divorce filing. They're claiming you committed fraud by gathering evidence without his knowledge. I felt my stomach drop. Can they do that? Patricia smiled, the kind of smile a shark might give before attacking. They can try. But Connecticut law is very clear about what constitutes fraud in matrimonial cases, and what you did doesn't come close. You hired a private investigator to confirm your suspicions, gathered evidence of your husband's misconduct, and protected your own interests. That's not fraud. That's exactly what any intelligent person should do in your situation. She explained that Marcus's strategy was predictable. Since he couldn't deny the affair or the hidden assets, he was trying to make me look like the villain in the story. His lawyers would argue that I'd manipulated the situation, orchestrated the Thanksgiving confrontation, and violated his privacy by investigating his activities. The problem with their strategy, Patricia continued, is that your husband handed us the perfect rebuttal by serving you papers at Thanksgiving dinner. No judge in Connecticut is going to feel sorry for a man who publicly humiliated his wife while toasting his mistress. Over the next 2 hours, we went through every piece of evidence Linda had gathered, organizing it into a timeline that told the complete story of Marcus's deception. The hotel receipts, credit card statements, email exchanges, and financial records painted a picture of systematic betrayal that would be impossible for any reasonable judge to ignore. The beautiful thing about your case, Patricia explained, is that your husband documented everything himself. Every hotel stay with Amanda, every expensive dinner, every piece of jewelry he bought her, it's all there in black and white, paid for with marital assets. She estimated that Marcus had spent nearly $90,000 on his affair over 18 months, money that should have been ours, used instead to wine and dine his mistress while lying to me about working late and attending conferences. Under Connecticut's dissipation of assets doctrine, Patricia continued, you're entitled to be compensated for every dollar he spent on his affair. That means he'll have to repay the full $90,000 to the marital estate before we even begin dividing other assets. But the financial compensation was just the beginning. Because Marcus had hidden assets and lied about his income during the divorce proceedings, Patricia could also seek punitive damages for fraud. And because he'd committed adultery, I had grounds for a fault-based divorce that would give me significant advantages in asset division. Your husband thought he was being clever by preparing those divorce papers in advance, Patricia said. Instead, he created evidence of premeditation that's going to cost him everything. Tuesday brought our first court appearance, an emergency hearing requested by Marcus's legal team to contest the validity of my divorce filing. I'd never been on the receiving end of litigation before, and walking into that courthouse as a defendant rather than a prosecutor was surreal. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting at the plaintiff's table with two lawyers I recognized as partners from Morrison and Associates. He looked like he hadn't slept since our confrontation, and when our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw something I'd never seen in 12 years of marriage: fear. Judge Rebecca Morrison, no relation to my attorney, despite the name coincidence, was exactly the kind of judge I'd hoped to get. A woman in her 60s with a reputation for having zero tolerance for nonsense and even less tolerance for men who tried to manipulate the legal system to avoid consequences for their behavior. Marcus's lead attorney, David Brennan, presented their case with the kind of polished confidence that probably worked well in corporate litigation. He argued that I'd committed fraud by concealing my investigation from my husband, that I'd violated his privacy rights, and that I'd manipulated the situation to create evidence that didn't exist before my interference. Your Honor, Brennan said, Mrs. Whitmore orchestrated an elaborate deception designed to entrap her husband and create grounds for divorce that wouldn't have existed otherwise. She hired private investigators to spy on him, invited his colleague to their home under false pretenses, and deliberately created a confrontational situation designed to make him look bad. It was a clever argument, I had to admit. Brennan was trying to reframe my strategic thinking as dishonest manipulation, suggesting that I'd somehow tricked Marcus into having an 18-month affair and stealing $90,000 from our joint accounts. But Patricia Morrison was in her element. When she stood to respond, she had the calm confidence of someone who'd been waiting her entire career for exactly this moment. Your Honor, she began, opposing counsel's argument requires us to believe that Mrs. Whitmore somehow hypnotized her husband into having an affair, forced him to steal money from their joint accounts, and made him lie about his activities for 18 months. This is not fraud. This is a wife who suspected her husband of cheating and took reasonable steps to protect herself legally and financially. Patricia pulled out exhibits that told the complete story. Marcus's affair had begun long before I'd hired Linda, his financial deception had been ongoing for over a year, and his plan to serve me with divorce papers had been in development for months. Mr. Whitmore wasn't entrapped into anything, Patricia continued. He made a series of deliberate choices to betray his marriage vows, steal from his wife, and plan a divorce designed to leave her with as little as possible. The only thing Mrs. Whitmore did wrong was trust her husband for too long. But the most devastating moment came when Patricia played audio recordings of Marcus's phone calls with Amanda, conversations Linda's tech consultant had legally intercepted from Marcus's office phone system. In those calls, Marcus and Amanda discussed their timeline for divorcing me, their plans for hiding assets, and their strategies for minimizing any financial consequences. She'll never figure it out, Marcus's voice said clearly through the courtroom speakers. Sarah's too trusting and too naive to ever suspect anything. By the time we serve her papers, it'll be too late for her to do anything about it. The silence in the courtroom after that recording was deafening. I watched Judge Morrison's face change from professional neutrality to obvious disgust, watched Marcus slump in his chair like he'd been physically struck, watched his lawyers exchange glances that suggested they were reconsidering their entire strategy. Judge Morrison ruled from the bench, which almost never happens in matrimonial cases. I've been practicing family law for 32 years, she said, looking directly at Marcus, and I have never seen a more clear-cut case of matrimonial misconduct. Mr. Whitmore systematically betrayed his marriage, stole from his wife, lied under oath, and attempted to manipulate the legal system to avoid consequences for his behavior. She denied every motion Marcus's team had filed, validated my divorce petition in its entirety, and issued temporary orders that gave me exclusive use of our marital home and froze all of Marcus's assets pending the final divorce decree. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, I'm referring this case to the State Bar Association for investigation of potential ethical violations by Mr. Whitmore and his former associate, Ms. Chen. Lawyers who engage in fraud during their own divorce proceedings raise serious questions about their fitness to practice law. As we left the courthouse, Marcus tried one more time to approach me. Sarah, please, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Patricia stepped between us. Mr. Whitmore, you're under a restraining order. Any communication with my client needs to go through me. I just want to explain, Marcus started. You explained everything perfectly clearly in those recordings, I said quietly. I was too trusting and too naive to figure out what you were doing. Well, I figured it out. And now you get to live with the consequences. That afternoon, Linda called with an update that made everything even better. Amanda Chen filed a sexual harassment complaint against Marcus with the State Bar Association, she reported. She's claiming that he abused his position as a senior partner to coerce her into a sexual relationship, and that she was afraid to refuse because it would hurt her career. I almost felt sorry for Marcus. Almost. He'd spent months thinking he was smarter than everyone around him, manipulating his wife and his mistress with equal skill. Now both women were fighting back, and he was discovering that being clever isn't the same thing as being wise. There's more, Linda continued. I have it on good authority that Morrison and Associates is going to ask Marcus to resign from the partnership. The liability issues from his affair, combined with the ethical violations from the divorce proceedings, make him too much of a risk. Marcus was losing everything: his marriage, his house, his money, his career, and his reputation. All because he'd underestimated the woman who'd loved him for 12 years. All because he'd thought revenge was a game he knew how to play. Wednesday brought a call from Tyler, Marcus's brother, who sounded exhausted and frustrated. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and please be honest. Is there any possibility that you and Marcus could work this out? Maybe go to counseling, take some time apart, try to rebuild. I understood why he was asking. Tyler loved his brother despite everything Marcus had done, and he was probably getting pressure from their parents to help fix the unfixable. Tyler, your brother made a choice, I said gently. He chose to have an affair, chose to steal money from our marriage, chose to plan a divorce designed to humiliate and impoverish me. Those weren't mistakes or lapses in judgment. They were deliberate, calculated decisions made over many months. But people can change, Tyler started. Maybe they can, I interrupted. But I can't unknow what I know now. I can't unfeel what it was like to discover that the man I loved was calling me naive and pathetic behind my back. I can't pretend that 18 months of systematic betrayal was just a mistake. Tyler was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry, he said finally. I'm sorry for what my brother did to you, and I'm sorry for asking you to consider forgiving the unforgivable. I don't need his forgiveness, I said. And I don't need yours. What I need is for everyone to understand that this isn't about anger or revenge anymore. This is about justice. And justice, I was learning, could be a beautiful thing when it finally arrived. 3 weeks after our first court appearance, Marcus's entire world had collapsed so completely that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I'd remember the sound of him toasting his mistress at our Thanksgiving table, and the sympathy would disappear. The most satisfying development came through Jeremy Morrison's resignation letter, which somehow found its way to me via our mutual friend Kevin. Jeremy had decided to leave Morrison and Associates entirely rather than continue working with Marcus, and his letter to the other partners made fascinating reading. I can no longer ethically or professionally associate with a partner who has demonstrated such fundamental dishonesty, Jeremy had written. Marcus Whitmore's conduct has compromised the integrity of our firm and created liability issues that could affect all of us. I believe the only appropriate response is his immediate termination from the partnership. According to Kevin, who still had contacts at the firm, Jeremy's resignation had triggered a cascade of other departures. 3 junior associates had already accepted positions elsewhere, and 2 major clients had terminated their retainer agreements. The scandal was spreading through Connecticut's legal community like wildfire, and Marcus was rapidly becoming radioactive. But the personal consequences were even more devastating than the professional ones. Linda called me on a Thursday afternoon with an update that made me understand just how completely Marcus had destroyed his own life. Your ex-husband is living in a studio apartment in Bridgeport, she reported. 1 bedroom, no parking, roaches included in the rent. He's driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic because the BMW got repossessed last week. The image was almost too pathetic to process. Marcus, who'd once prided himself on his success and status, was now living like a college student because he'd gambled everything on a relationship that had imploded the moment it became public. Amanda Chen moved back to California, Linda continued. Got a job with a firm in San Francisco that apparently didn't do thorough reference checks. She left Connecticut without giving Marcus any forwarding information. So much for true love. Amanda had abandoned Marcus the moment their affair became professionally and socially toxic, leaving him to face the consequences alone. The woman he'd thought was worth destroying his marriage for had disappeared the instant she needed to protect her own career. "There's more," Linda said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. The State Bar Association opened a formal ethics investigation. They're looking into whether Marcus's conduct during the divorce proceedings violated his professional responsibilities. If they find misconduct, he could be suspended or even disbarred. The irony was perfect. Marcus had spent his entire career building a reputation as an ethical, successful attorney. Now that same reputation was being systematically destroyed by his own actions, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Friday brought the most unexpected development of all, a call from Marcus himself. I almost didn't answer when I saw his name on my phone, but curiosity got the better of me. When I picked up, his voice sounded hollow and desperate. "Sarah, I know I'm not supposed to contact you directly, but I need to ask you something." "You're right, you're not supposed to contact me," I said. "All communication goes through Patricia. Please, just give me 30 seconds. I need to know, do you hate me?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been expecting anger, manipulation, maybe even threats. Instead, he sounded like a broken man genuinely trying to understand how we'd gotten to this point. "No, Marcus," I said quietly. "I don't hate you. Hating you would require me to care about you, and I don't anymore. You're just a stranger who used to live in my house." The silence that followed was so long I thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I destroyed everything, didn't I?" "Yes," I said. "You did." "I miss you," he said, and I could hear tears in his voice. "I miss our life. I miss our house. I miss having coffee with you in the morning and talking about our days. I miss being married to my best friend." For just a moment, I felt the old pull, the old desire to comfort him and make everything okay. But that impulse lasted less than a second before reality reasserted itself. "You should have thought about that before you decided I was too naive and pathetic to deserve honesty," I said. "You should have thought about that before you spent 18 months lying to my face while planning to humiliate me." "I never thought of you as pathetic," he started. "I have recordings of you saying exactly that," I interrupted. "I have emails where you called me naive and trusting like those were character flaws. You didn't lose me, Marcus. You threw me away. And now you get to live with that choice." I hung up without saying goodbye and immediately called Patricia to report the contact violation. She assured me she'd file a motion with the court and that Marcus would face sanctions for violating the no-contact order. But the call had unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Hearing Marcus sound so broken, so completely destroyed by the consequences of his own actions, stirred up emotions I thought I'd moved past. Not love, I was done with loving him, but a kind of sad recognition of what we'd lost. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done since the affair was revealed. I drove past our old life. I went to the restaurants where we'd shared romantic dinners, the bookstore where we'd spent Sunday afternoons, the park where we'd talked about buying a house and starting a family. It was like visiting a museum of my own past, seeing the places where a different version of myself had been genuinely happy with a man I'd thought I knew completely. That woman, the trusting wife who'd believed in forever, felt like a stranger now. I mourned for her loss of innocence, but I wouldn't trade places with her for anything. The new Sarah, the one who'd learned to investigate and strategize and fight for what she deserved, was stronger. Harder, maybe, but definitely stronger. And I was beginning to like her quite a bit. Monday brought the news I'd been waiting for. Patricia called to tell me that Marcus's legal team had requested a settlement conference. They wanted to negotiate rather than continue fighting in court. "It's a smart move on their part," Patricia explained. "They know they're going to lose if this goes to trial, and Marcus can't afford the legal fees for a protracted battle. But I want you to understand something before we go into negotiations. You hold all the cards here. We can afford to be generous or ruthless, whatever feels right to you. I thought about that carefully. Part of me wanted to be ruthless, to take everything I could possibly get, to make Marcus pay for every moment of pain and humiliation he'd caused. But another part of me just wanted this to be over, wanted to close this chapter of my life and move on to whatever came next. I want what's fair, I told Patricia. I want to be compensated for the money he stole, I want my share of our assets, and I want him to understand that actions have consequences. But I don't need to destroy him completely.
Are you sure?
Patricia asked. Because we could probably take everything. The house, his pension, his partnership stake, all of it. I considered that possibility, imagined Marcus losing absolutely everything while I walked away with the spoils of our 12-year marriage. It would be perfect revenge, complete and devastating. But revenge, I was learning, had a cost. The more energy I put into punishing Marcus, the less energy I had for building my own new life. And I was ready to start building. Fair is enough, I said. I want justice, not vengeance. The settlement conference was held in Patricia's office the following Thursday. Marcus arrived looking like a shadow of his former self, thin, pale, wearing a suit that had seen better days. His lawyers looked grim but professional, clearly aware that they were negotiating from a position of weakness. For 2 hours, we worked through the details of our financial dissolution. Marcus would repay the $90,000 he'd spent on his affair, plus interest and penalties. I would get the house, half of his pension, and a significant alimony award for the first 5 years of my divorce. He would get his personal belongings, his car, once he figured out how to get it back from repossession, and whatever was left of his legal career. It was fair. More than fair, actually. I was walking away from our marriage financially secure and emotionally free, while Marcus was facing years of financial struggle and professional uncertainty. But the most important moment came at the very end, when Patricia asked if I wanted to make any personal statements as part of the settlement. I looked across the table at Marcus, this man who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my life for 12 years, this stranger who'd called me pathetic behind my back while planning to humiliate me in front of our families. I want you to know that I forgive you, I said quietly. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve peace. What you did was unforgivable, but I'm choosing to forgive it anyway, for my own sake. Marcus started crying then, quiet, desperate tears that spoke to a grief deeper than anything I'd seen from him before. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so fucking sorry, Sarah. I ruined the best thing in my life, and I'm sorry. I know you are, I said. But sorry doesn't fix anything. Sorry doesn't undo 18 months of lies. Sorry doesn't give me back the marriage I thought we had. I stood up, gathering my purse and coat, ready to leave this room and this part of my life behind forever. But here's what I want you to remember, I continued. Every time you're tempted to lie to someone you love, every time you think about taking the easy way out instead of having a difficult conversation, every time you're tempted to underestimate someone because you think they're too trusting or naive to fight back, remember me. Remember this moment. Remember what it cost you to forget that the people who love you the most deserve your honesty the most. As I walked out of that conference room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: lightness. The weight of betrayal, the burden of anger, the exhaustion of fighting, all of it was lifting, leaving me free to figure out what came next. Marcus had taught me that love without honesty is just elaborate deception. But I taught him something too, that underestimating people can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. And as I drove home to my house now, I realized that both lessons were exactly what we'd needed to learn. 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner that changed everything, I was sitting in my garden on a warm May morning, drinking coffee and reading job offers. 3 different law firms had approached me about senior prosecutor positions, 2 corporate firms wanted to discuss partnership tracks, and 1 startup was offering me a general counsel position that would triple my government salary. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had spent months talking about how my bleeding heart prosecutor salary made me financially dependent on him, how my career was a hobby compared to his serious legal work. Now I was fielding offers that would make me more successful than he'd ever been, while he was working as a contract attorney for a firm in Stamford that specialized in personal injury cases. But the most interesting offer had come from an unexpected source. Patricia Morrison had asked if I'd consider joining her practice as a partner, specializing in high-net-worth divorce cases. "You have something most divorce attorneys never develop," she'd explained over lunch the previous week. "You understand betrayal from the inside. You know what it feels like to discover that your entire life has been a lie. That emotional intelligence, combined with your prosecutorial skills and your strategic thinking, makes you uniquely qualified to help other people navigate the worst moments of their lives." The idea was tempting. I discovered during my own divorce that I had a talent for legal strategy that went beyond my courtroom experience. I could see patterns, anticipate moves, understand the psychology of people under extreme stress. Maybe helping other betrayed spouses fight for justice could be more than just a career. Maybe it could be a calling. My house had become a sanctuary in ways I'd never expected. Without Marcus's presence, without the constant undercurrent of tension and deception, the space had transformed into something entirely my own. I'd redecorated the master bedroom, converted Marcus's home office into a reading room, and turned the guest room into a proper home office where I could work on freelance legal projects. The garden had become my favorite retreat. I'd expanded the flower beds, planted herbs and vegetables, and created a small seating area where I could have my morning coffee while watching the sunrise. It was peaceful in a way that my life hadn't been for years, maybe decades. Linda had become an unexpected friend through all of this. What had started as a professional relationship during the investigation had evolved into genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences. She'd been through her own devastating divorce 15 years earlier and understood both the pain of betrayal and the strength that could grow from surviving it. "The thing people don't tell you about getting revenge," Linda said during one of our regular lunch meetings, "is that it's actually the least important part of the whole process. The investigation, the planning, the execution, all of that is really about taking back control of your own life." She was right. The public humiliation of Marcus at Thanksgiving, the legal victory, the financial settlement, none of that had actually healed the hurt or restored what I'd lost. What had healed me was discovering that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, smarter than people gave me credit for, and capable of rebuilding my life from the ground up. The most surprising development had been reconnecting with old friendships that had faded during my marriage. College friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out after hearing about my divorce through the social media grapevine. High school classmates sent messages of support. Former colleagues from my early prosecutorial days invited me to professional networking events. I realized that I'd allowed my world to shrink during my marriage, focusing so completely on Marcus and our shared social circle that I'd lost touch with the broader network of relationships that had once defined me. Getting those connections back felt like rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. My parents had been incredible throughout the entire ordeal. Mom had flown out 3 times to help with house projects and provide emotional support. Dad had taken on the role of protective father with an intensity that might have been embarrassing if it hadn't felt so good to know someone was completely on my side. "I never liked Marcus," Dad had confessed during one of his visits. "He always seemed like he thought he was smarter than everyone else in the room. But you loved him, so I kept my mouth shut." "You never said anything," I'd replied, surprised by this revelation. "Because it wasn't my place to say anything unless you asked. But I'm glad you didn't ask, because I would have told you to run, and then you never would have learned how strong you really are." Marcus's family had been more complicated to navigate. James and Patricia Whitmore had made it clear that they considered me family regardless of the divorce, but holidays and gatherings were obviously going to be awkward for the foreseeable future. Tyler and Jennifer had invited me to their son's birthday party, but I declined, recognizing that some boundaries were necessary for everyone's comfort. The hardest part was knowing that I'd lost not just Marcus, but also our shared dreams of the future. We'd talked for years about having children, about growing old together, about the trips we'd take and the memories we'd make. Those possibilities were gone now, erased by his choices, and grieving them was more difficult than grieving the end of our relationship. But new possibilities were emerging to replace the old ones. I was 40 years old, financially secure, professionally successful, and emotionally free for the first time in my adult life. I could go anywhere, do anything, become anyone I wanted to be. The future was completely open, completely mine to design. One warm evening in late May, I was working in my garden when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway.
Sarah.
This is Jennifer Chen, Amanda's sister. I almost dropped the phone. Amanda's sister? I hadn't even known Amanda had family in the area. I know this is incredibly awkward, Jennifer continued, and you have every right to hang up on me. But I wanted to call because I think you deserve to know what really happened with my sister. I sat down on my garden bench, not sure whether I wanted to hear this story or not. But curiosity won out over caution. Amanda didn't tell you the truth about the affair, Jennifer said. She wasn't seduced by your husband. She targeted him deliberately, as part of a pattern she's been repeating for years. According to Jennifer, Amanda had a history of pursuing married partners in positions of authority, professors during law school, senior associates at her previous firms, partners at prestigious companies. It was a deliberate strategy designed to advance her career and her social status. She researched your husband for months before making her move, Jennifer explained. She knew about your marriage, knew about your financial situation, knew exactly how to appeal to his ego and his midlife insecurities. Marcus wasn't her first married partner, and he won't be her last. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness hearing this. Vindication because it confirmed that Marcus hadn't just been unlucky in love, he'd been systematically manipulated by someone who saw him as a mark rather than a soulmate. Sadness because it meant his betrayal was even more meaningless than I'd realized. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because Amanda destroyed your marriage for her own selfish purposes, and you deserve to know that it was never about love or passion or any of the romantic nonsense she probably fed him. It was about money and status and using other people to get what she wanted. After Jennifer hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, processing this new information. Part of me felt sorry for Marcus all over again. He'd thrown away 12 years of marriage for a woman who'd seen him as nothing more than a stepping stone to her own success. But mostly, I felt grateful. Grateful that I'd discovered the truth before it was too late to fight back. Grateful that I'd found the strength to protect myself. Grateful that I was sitting in my own garden, in my own house, planning my own future instead of living a lie built on someone else's manipulation. That night, I made a decision that had been brewing for weeks. I called Patricia Morrison and accepted her partnership offer. I was going to help other betrayed spouses navigate their own battles, using everything I'd learned from my own experience to help them reclaim their lives and their dignity.
Are you sure?
Patricia asked. It's going to be emotionally demanding work, dealing with betrayal and deception every day.
I'm sure, I said.
I understand now that what happened to me wasn't unique. There are other Amandas out there, other people who think they can manipulate and exploit and discard others without consequences. And there are other people like me, trusting, loyal, underestimated, who deserve someone in their corner who understands exactly what they're going through. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, excitement about the future. Not just relief that the worst was behind me, but genuine anticipation for what was coming next. Marcus had taught me that trust without verification is just naivety. But I'd learned something even more valuable, that the people who underestimate you give you the greatest gift of all, the element of surprise when you prove them wrong. And I was just getting started proving people wrong. 2 years after that Thanksgiving dinner, I was standing in the kitchen of my renovated house, preparing for a very different kind of holiday celebration. This time, I was hosting Thanksgiving for choice, not obligation, a gathering of people who'd become family through shared experiences and mutual support rather than blood or marriage. Linda would be there, along with her teenage daughter who was considering law school. Patricia Morrison was coming with her husband, bringing stories from our thriving partnership and updates on the high-profile cases we'd been winning together. My parents were flying in from Michigan, as they had every year since my divorce. Tyler and Jennifer had asked if they could join us, wanting their children to maintain a relationship with Aunt Sarah despite the family complications. But the guests I was most excited about were the 3 women who'd become more than clients. They'd become friends, sisters in the strange sorority of betrayed wives who'd fought back and won. Rebecca had discovered her husband's affair with his dental hygienist through credit card receipts for jewelry she'd never received. Maria had learned about her husband's double life when his other girlfriend called their house looking for him. Janet had found out about her husband's embezzlement scheme when the FBI raided their home office. All three had come to Morrison and Associates in the depths of despair, convinced they were powerless victims of their husbands' betrayals. All three had left our office as warriors who'd reclaimed their lives, their dignity, and their financial security. Working with betrayed spouses had turned out to be more rewarding than I'd ever imagined. Every case reminded me of my own journey from naive victim to strategic victor. Every successful settlement felt like justice not just for my client, but for every woman who'd ever been told she was too trusting, too emotional, too dependent to fight back effectively. The practice had grown beyond our wildest projections. We now had 4 attorneys specializing in high-net-worth divorce cases, 2 private investigators on retainer, and a reputation that extended throughout New England. I'd been featured in Connecticut Magazine as one of the state's most successful divorce attorneys, and Patricia and I were co-authoring a book about protecting yourself from financial deception in marriage. But the most satisfying part wasn't the professional success. It was the transformation I witnessed in every client who walked through our doors. They'd arrive broken and scared, convinced they were victims of circumstances beyond their control. They'd leave empowered and confident, understanding that they had more power than their cheating spouses had ever imagined. My personal life had evolved in unexpected directions too. I'd started dating again 6 months earlier, nothing serious, just dinner and conversation with men who appreciated intelligence over manipulation, honesty over charm. I wasn't looking for another marriage, wasn't trying to replace what I'd lost with Marcus. Instead, I was exploring what it felt like to be chosen by someone who knew exactly who I was and valued me for it. The house had become a showcase of my independence and success. I'd renovated the master bathroom, updated the kitchen with professional-grade appliances, and converted the basement into a home gym and meditation space. Every change reflected my personality rather than compromise, my preferences rather than negotiation. But the most meaningful transformation was internal. The woman who'd signed divorce papers at that Thanksgiving table 2 years ago had been reactive, defensive, focused on proving she wasn't the naive victim her husband believed her to be. The woman preparing this year's dinner was proactive, confident, focused on building rather than defending. At 4 o'clock, my guests began arriving for what had become our annual tradition, a Thanksgiving celebration of survival, success, and the strength that comes from refusing to stay down when life knocks you over. Linda arrived first, carrying her famous sweet potato casserole and stories about her latest case. Patricia and her husband brought wine and updates about the book contract we'd just signed. My parents came with photo albums full of pictures from their recent trip to Ireland, finally taking the adventures they'd postponed during their working years. But the moment that meant the most came when Tyler, Jennifer, and their 2 children arrived. 8-year-old Emma ran straight to me with a hug that nearly knocked me over, while 5-year-old Michael proudly presented me with a drawing he'd made of our Thanksgiving dinner. "Aunt Sarah," Emma said seriously, "Mommy told me you're the strongest person she knows. Is that true?" I knelt down to her level, looking into eyes that reminded me so much of Marcus at that age, curious, innocent, trusting in the way that made betrayal so devastating when it finally came. "I think everyone is stronger than they realize," I told her. "Sometimes we just need the right situation to discover our strength." As we gathered around the dining room table, the same table where Marcus had tried to humiliate me 2 years earlier, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd gained. The ability to trust my own instincts. The knowledge that I could survive anything. The understanding that the people who underestimate you are actually giving you a tremendous advantage. Rebecca raised her wine glass and proposed a toast that had become our tradition, to second chances, to new beginnings, and to discovering that we're all much stronger than anyone ever told us we were. As we drank to that toast, I caught sight of my reflection in the dining room mirror. The woman looking back at me was confident, successful, surrounded by people who valued her for exactly who she was. She bore little resemblance to the naive wife who'd been so afraid of losing everything that she'd nearly lost herself. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Tyler pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know that Marcus asks about you," he said quietly. "He's doing better now. Got a decent job with a firm in Hartford, moved into a nicer apartment. But he still talks about you, still regrets what he did.
How is he really?
I asked, surprised to find that I genuinely wanted to know. Lonely, Tyler said simply. He dated Amanda for a few months after the divorce was finalized, but that ended badly when he realized she'd been using him all along. He's been to therapy, joined a support group for men dealing with the consequences of their own bad decisions. I think he finally understands what he threw away. I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly. Marcus's loneliness was a consequence of his own choices, just as my happiness was a consequence of mine. I hope he finds peace, I said, and I meant it. But his peace isn't my responsibility anymore. Tyler nodded, understanding more than I'd expected. He wanted me to ask if you'd ever consider meeting with him. Not to reconcile, he knows that's impossible. Just to talk, maybe find some kind of closure. I considered that possibility. Part of me was curious about who Marcus had become, whether he'd learned anything from the destruction of our marriage. But a larger part of me recognized that closure wasn't something he could give me, it was something I'd already given myself. Maybe someday, I said.
But not yet.
I'm still building my new life, and I don't want to look backward until I'm completely satisfied with what I've built going forward. As the evening wound down and my guests began to leave, I found myself alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the warm remnants of a perfect Thanksgiving celebration. The contrast with that dinner 2 years ago was stark. Instead of humiliation and betrayal, I'd experienced love and support. Instead of being trapped in someone else's narrative, I'd written my own story. I walked out to my garden, now dormant for the winter but already planned for spring planting. In a few months, I'd be out here again, nurturing new growth, tending to the flowers and vegetables that would bloom under my care. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. I'd planted myself in new soil after Marcus had tried to uproot everything I thought I knew about my life. Now I was flourishing in ways I'd never imagined possible, growing stronger and more beautiful with each passing season. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I smiled when I saw who it was from. David, the architect I'd been dating, sending me a picture of his own Thanksgiving celebration with a message, "Hope your dinner was as wonderful as you deserve. Looking forward to hearing all about it tomorrow." For the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow too. Not because I was running from yesterday, but because I was excited about the possibilities that lay ahead. Marcus had taught me that the people we trust most can hurt us deepest. But I'd learned something even more valuable, that surviving betrayal can teach you to trust yourself in ways you never thought possible. And that, I realized as I looked up at the stars above my garden, was the most valuable lesson of all. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world where you felt underestimated, betrayed, or discarded by someone who claimed to love you, I want you to know something. You're stronger than they think you are. You're smarter than they believe. And you're capable of building a life so much better than the one they tried to take from you. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything you deserve and then some. It's proving that their worst mistake was underestimating you. It's living so well that their betrayal becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. Don't forget to subscribe if this story resonated with you, because everyone deserves to know that they're capable of turning their worst day into the first day of their best life. Thank you for listening, and remember, never let anyone convince you that you're too naive to fight back. Sometimes the most naive thing you can do is trust someone who calls you naive.